Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Sophos recently reported that 65% of manufacturing and production organizations were hit by ransomware last year, which, unlike other sectors, is an increase. Overall, these attacks have increased by 41% for manufacturing since 2020. Additionally, the cybersecurity firm found that 44% of all computers used in manufacturing have been impacted by a ransomware attack, and over half of these intrusions can be directly linked to either malicious emails or compromised credentials. These findings help illustrate what we've known for years, and that's simply that hackers would rather log in than break in. And stopping these types of attacks requires starting with your frontline defenses, the workforce. Our guest for today's episode will look to offer some solutions for transitioning employees from a weak link to a key cybersecurity asset. It's my pleasure to welcome Shawn Waldman, CEO and founder of Secure Cyber, a leading provider of secure network design solutions, to the show. Shawn, thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome to Security Breach. So getting things going here, we talk about OT, cybersecurity. It's always a lot of conversations about technology, new IoT devices coming out, new connections, API calls, all of that fun stuff. But at the core of a lot of our challenges is people. It's those frontline workers. And we've talked a lot about culture and the human element when it comes to cybersecurity, but this is an area that you dive into and you deal with quite a bit. So I'd really love to get your perspective and your impressions on how we can sort of transition our coworkers from being, I don't know, maybe it's kind of harsh to call them a weak link, but a vulnerability or a soft spot to really becoming maybe more of a cybersecurity asset, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and you're dead on. In the sea of just all of the things that make up cyber and IT, we all are familiar with that term. That the human firewall, maybe using that analogy as training your workforce to make sure that they're educated, and I think that's at the core. So I think what I've seen a lot of organizations do is use more like cyber awareness training and those types of situations, those opportunities as just checking a box, and that couldn't be more damaging. So I think we need to see a better culture and a better investment by the business in order to really put education forward. Because there's a lot of things that I'm sure we'll talk about later in the podcast that hit this mark, but we've got to move from just cyber being a checkbox or cyber education being a checkbox, to really hammering the awareness. It's more than just phishing and those types of things, because really, I think we're entering a situation where security awareness training's dead.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. It becomes a check the box once a year type of thing. We did it. Let's move on.
Right.
This is sort of a leading question, but how do we get past that? I know it's a culture thing and maybe it starts at the top, but have you seen specific types of initiatives or tools that have sort of helped us get past that whole check the box mentality?
Well, I think one of the big things is moving away from some of the everybody uses kind of the same security awareness tool that's out there without naming the tool, right? And I think we need to see more advancement in that area. For example, we're developing a system within our platform to take a new vendor that we're working with that produces cyber awareness training, and using that information to plug it into our security investigation platform. So we're working on a system to tie in security awareness into the security tools, because honestly, there's been this constant issue with the business where, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners can identify with this, and maybe you can too, where we've got this one user that keeps clicking on everything, and then we don't know what to do with this person. Do we discipline them? Do we fire them? I've been involved in business compromises and walked in and, did the investigation and come to find out that there's this one user that just clicks on everything all the time. And, they're a constant risk to the organization. So I think it's a big combination of, just new tooling, seeing new solutions that take a different approach to awareness training, and then, plugging those tools into the active systems, and then really, really addressing those issues of what do we do with the employee that's a risk.
Yeah. When you bring up a couple interesting points there, I want to circle back to some of the tools that are out there, but getting away from sort of that punitive approach. We don't want to punish people necessarily, but we do need to educate them a little bit. What's been your experience in trying to walk that line in terms of we still want people to report when they do something wrong without them feeling like they've screwed everything up, but there's some level of maybe accountability or something that needs to take place there?
Right. So a couple things. One, I think we need to, as a business, reward the employees for when they do good. So it can't be constantly used as a tool to say, you did wrong, because, we know as humans and as managers, that people aren't going to, respond very well to that. And then, just not only just the positive impact, but just continually working with the employees on making security awareness training, more, more fun, more enlightening, more educational. And if the business is acting like it's a checkbox and it's just routine, then that's how the employees are going to react too.
Yeah. We've seen some different strategies out there like gamification sort of taking over and making that part of cybersecurity training. You mentioned sort of a competitive element to it, but whatever it can be to sort of change the paradigm and the messaging internally, I think would definitely have some positive impacts throughout the organization.
No, absolutely. We've experimented with the gamification thing. Certainly as we see a younger workforce taking in, that's a generation that's, definitely used to interacting with things on their phones and their iPads. And I think there will be an opportunity for gamification. We're actually looking into that on the cyber side, on the SOC side as well. We have our own operations center here, and the average SOC analyst lasts like a year and a half. So we're trying to squeeze like at least another year out of that, so that we're not going through that rotation. But yeah, I think all those things are up for grabs.
Yeah, I want to circle back a little bit too on some of that burnout that's happening with some of our, especially in the OT cybersecurity side of it. But before we go to that, you mentioned tools before and how in some cases there's a limited number. In other cases, boy, there's just a ton of different options out there. And this has become kind of an issue when you look at, especially OT cybersecurity and manufacturing, because at first we're struggling to get the budget and we're struggling to get buy-in. Then we get all these tools and in that rush to use those resources, there's cases where there is backup after backup and there's a lot of replication, and that budget isn't always having as much of an impact as we would like it to. Could you offer some perspective or some thoughts on just how do we sort through these tools and make sure you're getting not just everything, but the right thing?
Yeah, there's a lot in there to unpack. So, certainly the industry is absolutely flooded. I do a lot of work with, looking at new startups and evaluating technology. I do regular trips to Israel looking at, new industry startups, new cyber pieces. So, I can tell you just by experience that there's a lot out there. So, one, yes, there's a lot out there. Two, I really think it has to do with who you partner with as a business. So who is the business partnering with to make sure that you've got a good partner, a good solid partner that is not just pushing the tools that they're embedded with, but really truly looking at the organization and saying, okay, based on our risk profile, based on our budget, and based on, there's a lot of work that goes into evaluating and vetting, hardware and software solutions. So you've got to really find that partner that really has that knowledge. And I'm going to beat a drum, and it's not because of who I am, but I think really we have to drive education into industry where they need to make sure that they're partnering with, if you're looking for cybersecurity solutions, you should be partnering with a cybersecurity vendor versus an IT company, right? Looking at an IT company to provide you expertise, right? That's like asking your physician for routine work, can you also do brain surgery? Because I just want to write one check, right? So we run into that a lot because, I just was speaking about it this weekend where there are many opportunities where you've chosen the right or the wrong solutions, right? But they're absolutely misconfigured. That's another issue. The Verizon data breach investigative report, this last one, really hammered on that and saying that a lot of these breaches and a lot of these intrusions that we're seeing are just flat out misconfigurations.
Yeah. Boy, the Verizon report comes up a lot. I look at it as well. We hear a lot of people talking about it. If anybody hasn't checked it out, I'd highly encourage you. It's very wide ranging in terms of what it talks about. Just a great resource. Really interesting perspective there as well, Shawn, in terms of identifying the right partner, and that'll help with a lot of that tool selection. And I think a lot of that also goes into having some internal understanding and expertise. You mentioned some of these SOC individuals really kind of burning out after a year and a half. In the manufacturing sector, what we really see is just struggle to find the right folks to plug in. Those that understand not just IT, but OT security and how different it is from the IT side of things. What are you seeing there in terms of, do you grow these folks? Are they homegrown? Are the people you're trying to get from the outside? Combination of both? What's your perspective there, I guess?
Well, I started a cybersecurity company 10 years ago. So what I saw was this convergence thing where 10 years ago, I didn't have cybersecurity people that I could hire. So I had to look at a lot of senior level IT people and convert them into cybersecurity people. Well, add in the OT piece. We started a OT practice about during COVID, and about 4 years ago, and there's just this huge shortage of people. It's not only that you have to have cybersecurity expertise, but you really need to understand things like industrial controls and SCADA, right? When we're talking about manufacturing, I think that gets lost in translation a lot. We focus on just the cybersecurity of the plant, but we don't really look at the control systems and those areas, because to your point, there's just a lack of talent. So what I've saw, to answer your question, is just this grow your own program where, we take a subset of individuals that, may or may not have a cyber piece. We can get them the cyber technology education and bring them up to speed to be cyber analysts. But then we really want them to concentrate their skill set on things like industrial controls and SCADA, because I just really see we do a lot of that work, and that field is wide open. There's there's 250,000 unfilled positions or more just in cybersecurity alone globally. And I can't even imagine what it takes or what the deficit is just for finding people to work, a CNC machine at a manufacturing plant. So we do have some things in common, though. So manufacturing and cyber have very much something in common, where cybersecurity is a trade. I've made that comment before. Some people like it, some people don't, but I truly believe that cyber is a trade.
No, that's a great insight. I couldn't agree more. I mean, when you look at all of the different specializations that are going on now, we've figured out finally, I think, that IT to OT, it's not a cut and paste situation. There's a lot of very specific and very customizable needs that come into play. Another place that we've seen a lot of folks take advantage of is just folks coming out of the military and tapping into some of that expertise that they may have as well. Something that we have learned from the trades in really going after that demographic as well. So makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I actually have a law enforcement background. So I used to be a police officer back in the day, and I've actually see a big opportunity to also go after retired law enforcement officers. So we've got, police officers that are, and firefighters, or really anybody in public safety, right, that you could convert them. But specifically the law enforcement officers are very, they have a desire, they have a built-in curiosity, especially if you look at like somebody that would retire as a homicide detective. I mean, think of a homicide detective and turning them into a cybersecurity analyst. I mean, they're not quite looking after the same things, right? But if you look at the root of how they're wired, those are really good individuals to look at. So I call it a vet to tech program, and that kind of covers both, right? It covers, ex-military, and it can cover public safety as well.
No, that's a great call. When you think about the mindset and all the questions that you have to constantly be asking to really get to the bottom of what's going on, what the root cause in a lot of these situations, couldn't agree more. That's a great connection. Sort of feeding off of that, another big trend we're seeing in the industrial sector is really the rise of these initial access brokers, really going after credentials, a lot of credential harvesting focus. And again, that's just a separate, like a subset of the hacking community, that they're just focused on this one specific thing. Just kind of curious what you're seeing there in terms of the rise in their tactics of these IABs, as well as things, again, getting back to that human element. What are some things that we can do just to protect our logins a little bit better?
Yeah, the initial access broker piece has been really an evolution over time. So, that's not the pattern that we were seeing 5 years ago. 5 years ago, these guys were one-stop shops, and they go in and, do the initial access, and they'd be the ones that were, compromising the network. And I think really what people don't understand and see is that this whole thing is an enterprise. It's a business. It's a criminal underground. So this is the 20th century mafia, right? So this is just how that works. And that's been a big evolution. So over time, hacker groups and these organizations have become very structured. They're very organized. They use a lot of the same red and blue team tactics that we use. So there's a lot of escalation, going on. And I think some of the things, getting back to the initial access piece with passwords is just we need to really hammer the adoption. Again, not beating the drum about security awareness, but we need to. We need to drive this culture of where passwords are going. So, for example, on the personal side, really spending time with people and employees and educating them on proper password control, password management, the use of password managers. We talk a lot about multi-factor authentication, and that plays into the password piece. And people are like, yeah, I use MFA and I get the text message of the code that I'm supposed to use, and we're like, yeah, SMS really isn't something we need to use anymore. And they're like, oh, okay, so my phone on my phone, I've got the one-time passwords and the codes. And we're like, yeah, well, that's okay now, but we're really moving to, like YubiKeys and hardware tokens. If you're a military person, CAT cards and those types of things. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. But we really need to drive password management, and password managers. I guess if there was one, thing that I would, get your listeners to adopt, if you're an IT manager out there or somebody in charge of strategy for your manufacturing plant. I know it's tough. It's not the easiest thing in the world. Cyber doesn't always equal convenience. Actually, I don't know if it ever does. But we really need to start hammering that.
No, couldn't agree more. And, I'd be interested to get your thoughts here. What I'm seeing is typically when you inform employees of this is why we're putting in something like multi-factor authentication, or we want to do something more to make it more difficult to log in, they do embrace it. I just don't think that's always being done. I think the organizations are doing a bad job of really explaining why we're doing this, as opposed to the IT guy sending out an email saying, hey, you got to do this right now. I mean, if you had to sort of give companies a grade in terms of communicating the significance of this to employees, what do you think that would be? I mean, it's subjective. It's just kind of a fun thought. But, I mean, where are we in that communication process, in your opinion?
We're probably a low D at that point.
Okay.
I mean, if we had to give them a grade, and we're painting with a broad brush, right?
Right.
So 20 years ago, I was this young IT guy. I was coming out of law enforcement, and I was starting my own IT department for this park district here in town. And, I had a really good opportunity to learn the right way. And I don't know where I got the skill set from, but one of the things I really learned was to walk people through any change at all. There's a lot of books out there, Who Moved My Cheese and all this stuff about how, human beings just don't like to be told in any way what to do and how to do it without any explanation. So, going back to, kind of the top of the podcast when we were talking about cyber awareness, you really have to design a program. And part of that program is maybe you set up at the next company picnic, you set up a booth, right, where you've got some bands of, just mottos of how to stay secure, and, you're really pouring into it, right? You're all in. You're providing a program for people, and you're educating. You're taking the time to get them to understand this is why we're doing multi-factor authentication. This is, not to, do any harm or slow down your work. This is why we filter the internet. It's not because we don't trust you. It's because if we can stop a threat from being presented to you, then you may not react to it. So I totally agree with you. It's really about how you deliver the message, for sure.
Yeah, and that's a great point about slowing things down, because in manufacturing, that is the kiss of death. We don't want to slow down. We don't want to pause anything at all, but we have to embrace the fact that taking those couple extra seconds to do another verification of your login, it's just another part in keeping all those endpoints secure, all those connections secure, with all the other challenges we have from a technology perspective. Taking that a little extra minute, because I think we've seen it over and over again. Hackers would prefer not to break in. They would prefer to log in, just like everybody else. So,
yeah, and I think in the manufacturing space, I think you just have to get creative, right? So maybe you're a parts manufacturer for the automotive industry. Maybe you take advantage of the retooling, downtime to take the time to provide some extra training for the staff or get in front of them. So, I just think people need to look outside the box, slow down, take a look at what's going on, and come up with, be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Shawn, you founded Secure Cyber. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about the organization, the company, and what you guys are up to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I founded the company 10 years ago. When I started the company, I really just wanted to help people understand cyber. So this is going back to 2015, and the landscape of cybersecurity professionals that were out there, it was thin, like it was real thin. I often tell people it was like being a street sweeper in the desert. There there was just nobody around me, right?
Yeah.
I kind of took the company from risk assessments, which is really about what we were doing back then, to managed services, and really, we've just spent the last 10 years responding to our customer needs. As we would go through assessments, we would learn, hey, can you install a firewall for me? Yes. Can you manage it for me? Yes. And then, circle back to where we are today. We have a very sophisticated automation platform where we're able to ingest, just large amounts of log data from companies and look for threats, take proactive action, quarantine, all those, just glamorous security operations center activities that you want to see from a cybersecurity company. But we've also added things like people, process, and technology. We've added security awareness training, CISO services. So, helping organizations that can't afford to hire a full-time security chief, and giving them access to a fractional person that can help write policies and do pen tests and those types of things. And then, just full-blown professional services. So helping companies kind of get out of those 1990s, early 2000s network designs and move them into, a more current situation of, better networking, better segmentation, ransomware readiness, all those types of things. But I think the most important thing out of everything that we do is cyber is all we do. So we are those brain surgeons, those rocket scientists. I often tell people, I feel like I work with, that this is what it would feel like to work at NASA. I think I've got just some of the best engineers on the planet, and it's just our number one mission is to keep the hackers out.
Well, and I think it's great that you use the term engineering, because I think that not only it just resonates more strongly with the industrial sector, but it's more accurate. You mentioned before about it being a trade. It is. These are engineers, because you're working with so many different, even if it's not a physical moving part, it's a lot of moving parts and pieces. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yep, absolutely.
You mentioned your background in law enforcement. I believe there was a connection with the FBI as well. And I think a lot of the things that are going on right now in cybersecurity, not just the industrial sector, but beyond, it's really trying to create an element of transparency and sharing information. And some of that is enforced through regulatory actions. We've seen a lot of stuff in the manufacturing sector that's come to light primarily through the SEC, and a lot of things that are mandated with reporting there. I'd like to get your take in terms of, do we need more government involvement? Do we need more regulatory work? Or is this something that we have the groundworks for, and we should maybe let the industrial sector kind of figure it out the rest for themselves?
Well, it just so happened that the SEC is an area that we specialize in. So I don't know. I remember telling you that, but you just happened to hit on something there. So I'll give you my honest opinion. My honest opinion is I'd like to see less governmental involvement, but I'd like to see more regulatory work. And I know people are like, well, wait a minute, those are one and the same, right? It's typically the government is involved. Yes and no. If you look at the SEC specifically, broker dealers and investment organizations that are regulated by the SEC are actually absolutely terrified of them. And that's because the SEC has teeth and they mean business, right? That's our financial backbone of the United States. And, there's a lot of push there to be compliant with them and do things the right way. Unfortunately, that's not something that we see in the healthcare world, right? We see HIPAA I'm painting with a broad brush for all the HIPAA people that are watching. But it's just my opinion. What we've seen in the industry is that some of those regulators are very reactive. So, after you have a breach or you have an incident, we come in and destroy you, right? Because instead of working with the organization ahead of time to get them to get them compliant, offer them resources and guidance. So the manufacturing space to end, has been real rough in that part. We've seen the manufacturing space looking at things like 800, 171. We've looked at maybe DFARS or CMMC, because, typically, historically, a lot of governmental or a lot of manufacturers, have Department of Defense contracts, or they operate two businesses. They operate, there's a commercial side and there's a DoD side. We've seen, Federal Trade Commission potentially saying that they're going to get involved. So I would just like to see more stringent regulatory control, but I'd like to see less pushing from things like CISA and the government and forcing people to, do things like, report breaches and those types of things. I'm mixed on that whole thing. I understand the importance of getting notified about a breach, but I'm really hesitant on we're from the government, we're here to help.
Well, fair. And I would agree with you. I've definitely always taken a prospect of less government is better. I'm with you there. What I would like to see too is, we've taken those first steps in laying down sort of the regulatory groundwork. I'd like to see more support. Because what I see in manufacturing, when we look at the size of 80% of manufacturers in the U.S., they're going to be below 50 people. They're small organizations. And when they get hit by a ransomware attack, for example, they're going to pay because they need to get back up and running. And a lot of times that same hacker is staying in the system and it'll hit them again in 6 months. And there's never a chance for them to develop the resources to really shore up their defenses. And that's where I think the government could play a bigger role for some of these smaller enterprises, because the more we can learn and share, the smarter we should all get, and just make the hacker's job that much harder. I mean, we know we're playing catch up here most of the time, but we can at least make it tough for them. So,
yeah, that's without going into all of my personal political pieces, which I'm not going to do. I'll just end it with, I think there's opportunity to help manufacturers, like smaller manufacturers and smaller businesses, if maybe, let's say, the U.S. would, target where it spends money more wisely.
Fair.
Okay.
I gotcha.
All
so one of the things that I think has been a great part, and why I advocate for all this transparency, is because I think we've learned a lot. You mentioned, really bringing in the OT element of your business, or really focusing on it during COVID. I think that's the case for 75% of all manufacturers. That was really the antithesis of when they realized they needed to do this with more remote access going on. Colonial Pipeline spurred a lot of activity. What have you seen in terms of, maybe just over the last 3 or 4 years, some of the bigger lessons that we're learning from a cybersecurity perspective? I think a lot of it is because some of these things have come to light and we've seen the mistakes of others, but it could also just be that we're getting in more up to our elbow. What are we learning here?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the change of what we're learning by almost everybody experiencing a cyber incident by this point. So it's less of a conversation about, when we're talking to manufacturers or we're talking to businesses, it's less of a discussion of, well, this might happen to you, right? Statistically, you might be on your second or third breach. I think we have to, I've seen we have to push less of a, you need cybersecurity, to people going, yeah, I need cyber. Just the lessons of, multiple breaches. Certainly, most people are in tune with some of the bigger ones, like you said, like the Colonial Pipeline, seeing a lot of our our critical infrastructure being hit with water and wastewater. So I think people, and especially as, all these wars and global conflicts are going on, there's a lot of retaliation that's done from a cyber perspective. So I think people are more in tune with the threat. Because really, I think maybe 5-10 years ago, people just thought it was some guy and his lady in their basement, drinking Mountain Dew and eating Twinkies, hacking people for fun, right? One of my favorite movies is War Games, right? So, that right? So, but it's not, right? These are typically now nation state actors. This is North Korea, Iran, Russia, right? This is serious. These are people that not only want to interrupt our supply chain and damage things, but some of them want to harm us physically. And I think there's more of a reality of that going on, which is now spurring organizations, I think, to be a little more attentive at what they need to do from a cyber perspective. So we've just seen more proactive movement, I'll just say, than reactive, trying to reach out to somebody and saying, hey, do you need cybersecurity protection? So that's been a positive thing, just seeing people react proactively.
And I wouldn't downplay that. That's a big deal. That is a big movement from folks going from, do we need it, to we need it, help me out. That's a big step.
And I'll even tell you one more, where I even see people now looking at actually getting educated about the tools that they have and saying, Shawn, I've got this tool and I haven't heard it talk in a long time, or send this money to this cybersecurity company to protect me, but I've never gotten a phone call from them. Now people are really starting to get, a little nervous about that and saying, well, if I'm not hearing from my tools and I'm not hearing from my provider, are they doing the job for me? So I've even one more step, where they're really evaluating the business or the work that, that they've signed up for. Are we getting that value?
No, great points. And I would say this about war games. I tried watching it with my kids, and they were laughing way too much. It started to frustrate me. This was not a comedy. This was real. This was drama. But I can appreciate the lapse and appreciation of the green screen and the DOS and all that good stuff.
Do you know what's worse, Jeff, is hiring these new people? And I mentioned war games, and it's these really young guys and ladies, and they go, what?
Oh, come on.
That's the worst. I know.
Yeah.
I'm going to make them watch it.
Absolutely. Maybe like transition to A Good Day to Die Hard. I think that was the one with the Die Hard with the hacking in it. So
yeah, that's right. Right. The fire sale. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So Shawn, I know you probably get asked this a lot, and we talk about this a lot on the show, but we have to talk a little bit about AI. You mentioned before about an automation platform you've developed. Anytime you talk about automation and data, that's where everybody's brain goes, to artificial intelligence and machine learning. What's your perspective there? What are you seeing in terms of better uses for AI and kind of how it's impacting cybersecurity right now?
Well, I mean, you can go back to like the Snowflake incident, right? Where, we had Snowflake is a data lake provider. So, they're a company that, hey, send us a ton of data and we'll provide a system or a platform that allow you to analyze that, right? It's an AI kind of software as a service type platform. What we've just been seeing from a trend perspective, we saw the Snowflake incident. We've seen deep fakes and AI really step up, providing, like, for instance, we've seen emails crafted much nicer now. So phishing emails don't really have those misspellings and bad grammar because AI has kind of kicked in there, right, and kind of cured that. Get back to the education piece. We just see a lot of organizations that aren't properly educating their employees to understand the proper use of AI. ChatGPT is like one of the most biggest mainline things that we talk about in use. And that technology got out and got adopted and grew faster than the security companies could provide any type of protection around that. And the only thing that we could utilize at that time was education to properly get people on board with that. And now we're coming into an election, and it's just really ugly out there. So I see really good uses for AI in proper scenarios to help automate things or to help. Be a force multiplier. But really, I caution people a lot with just making sure that, do you really understand that tool? Do you know what its impacts are? Have you educated your staff to understand how they can and cannot utilize it? So AI, I know everybody is using that word and it's part of everything, but I really just encourage people to slow the heck down and really evaluate these tools and the risk that they may bring in or not.
Well, I think there is a potential over-reliance on these tools. We know how the bad guys are using AI. You mentioned the phishing emails and all that kind of stuff. The CrowdStrike ordeal kind of gets me thinking a little bit too, reading between the lines, trying to figure out if they relied on AI to potentially write the code that ended up being broken, or if they didn't use it to QA it before they sent out the update. That kind of illustrate, they've been kind of sketchy on the details there. You can read between the lines and make whatever assumptions you want. But there's also, I think, a potential over-reliance and then not using it the right way. It's kind of coming from both sides, I guess. I don't know.
No, absolutely. They today I haven't read it, but I guess the final report came out today. But everything that I was reading up to that point, I totally agree with you. Either you were relying on automation in way too many ways to help get this out faster without properly QAing it. Because everyone that I talked to said, if you would have loaded that update on a Falcon sensor in about 3 minutes or less, it would have blue screened, right? So, were we just pushing these out to stay on top of the curve, but were we, assuming a lot of risk there? And if one update would have gotten out, what type of damage would it have done? Well, now we know what that would have done, because now everybody in the world knows who CrowdStrike is. So they have to spend a little less money on brand recognition. But no, I totally agree with you. I just really think that organizations need to relax on the AI piece, not look at everything. If it says AI, it must be good for us. I just think, I don't know how it happened. I don't know how the world just got sucked into something like that, except that, just our reliance on technology, and it's an easy button. It's a big,
Yeah.
easy button, right?
No,
People
yeah.
like to take shortcuts, and they like, to get through things faster. But especially in the manufacturing space, and especially critical manufacturing space, I just really, I just want people to slow down and evaluate this. One of the biggest controls that we've seen out there that could possibly get in front of this is browser security. This used to be browser isolation technology, is what it was called, and now it's browser security. And really, it's the concept of using kind of placing a firewall on the browser itself. So these technologies, these browser security technologies, have the ability to stop somebody from putting information into something like ChatGPT if it's personally identifiable information or it's critical data. And kind of think of it as data loss prevention for a browser. And that's, I mean, outside of education, there's just a lot of bent up time in getting some of these new security systems up and running that can detect deep fakes and stuff like that. Some of that stuff's out there, but it's thin.
Yeah, it sort of sounds like a more restrictive, like email sandbox type of dynamic. With very interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So, Shawn, this has been awesome. We could talk about a lot of these topics for longer than we're looking to go here. But are there any other big trends you're seeing right now that may have an impact in the, I don't know, next 12, 18 months?
No, absolutely. I think probably one of the biggest things that people have heard is just this advancement of quantum computing. Quantum computing becomes a big threat as the evolution of that technology has the ability to do decryption really quickly, meaning that any of the encryption algorithms that we have in place now, whether that's encrypting data, encrypting hard drives, encrypting emails, we have the risk potentially of any information that's obtained that's encrypted of being compromised very quickly. So the best example I can give you is, some of the most hardened encryption. If you were to encrypt a hard drive, it could potentially today, without the advancement of quantum computing, it could take hundreds of years to decrypt. Well, if quantum computing makes the advancements that we think it's headed towards, they could decrypt that hard drive in minutes. So essentially making any encryption that we have today obsolete. We've got to really watch 5G cellular. We've got to watch the advancements of the cellular market, especially in the manufacturing and OT space. We see a lot of advancements in using cellular technology to connect plants and connect remote resources. And with those increased speeds, the threats of vulnerabilities and those types of things sneaking into 5G and into cellular is something that we really have to keep an eye on. Supply chain attacks. We talked about the CrowdStrike piece, and we've seen SolarWinds. I say CrowdStrike because convince me that wasn't a supply chain attack, because I'm just really not convinced that wasn't that, but maybe it wasn't. But SolarWinds was, right? SolarWinds was a major solar attack, or a major supply chain attack. SolarWinds is, a network monitoring software that's very widely used inside the federal government, and it was compromised. And then when an update went out, everybody who had the software potentially got a compromised version that was owned by the Russians. Global conflicts. We've really got to watch, the evolution of these global conflicts and the wars that we get involved in, because really what people don't realize is when the U.S. gets involved, whether it's here or not, a lot of times the retaliation can come just because of our involvement. So whether it's Russia, Israel, Iran, Iraq, whatever it's going to be, we've really got to watch international conflict, because that can sneak up on us.
Absolutely. No, I think those are all, the quantum stuff is really, it's equally scary and incredibly impressive in terms of the speed and what that's
Right.
going to do for all sorts of operations, but cybersecurity as well. The 5G is one I think that is going to hit next. I think that's going to be a really big deal in the industrial sector, because we're trying to figure out how to make it work. It needs to be as reliable as it possibly can be, which we've finally gotten there with a lot of wireless connections. Mm-hmm. But now the concern is, if it's that much faster, how do we make sure security is keeping pace, internally with some of those networking speeds? So that's going to be very interesting.
When some of that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with, just on the OT space and making sure that we've got good segmentation and firewalls.
Yeah.
Same for the cellular piece, right? We just need to make sure that people understand if you're going to adopt cellular and you're going to deploy cellular connections at remote sites, we need to still follow some of the same controls and make sure that we've got proper firewalls and proper segmentation. So again, back to things like ChatGPT, it's proper adoption. So do your homework and make sure we do the research to make sure we're adopting these technologies correctly.
And reinforce the fact that security is on you, not the service provider. I think that's a big misnomer right now too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of people, say, well, I'm going to go to Office 365 because I want to get off this on-prem email server and I'm going to push all this risk into the cloud. You may actually become more risky because we constantly see people saying, yeah, we went to Office 365, but you configured it incorrectly. And they're like, what do you mean? Microsoft is taking care of the security. That's the service of the cloud, right? Nope. They provide you a platform and it's your responsibility to secure it. It's the same with Snowflake. Snowflake itself was not compromised, but Ticketmaster, Advanced Auto Parts, all these companies that were involved in that were the ones compromised, and it's because they didn't apply the security to the service that they were using.
Yeah. Cloud security is a whole nother show too. We could definitely go on for hours about that one.
Right, absolutely.
Last one I want to pick your brain and get a little more thought from you on is you talked about some of these state actors or hacktivists or whatever label you want to put on them. There's so much collateral damage that is coming out of stuff being developed in the Ukraine and the Middle East in particular right now, and how that's impacting industrial control systems. I'd like to maybe, if you could just kind of offer some thoughts there in terms of things you're seeing or things that we should be more aware of or be prepared to respond to that are emanating from like they're not even going after manufacturers specifically, but it's spreading out from there and it's impacting these industrial control systems as well.
Yeah, one of the things that we saw just recently was that we saw a threat actor. It was Iran, and I think it was back in November. We saw Iran actually targeting Israeli-made equipment that was exposed to the internet that was very common in the water and wastewater sector. And so now, to answer your question, what we really need organizations to do is really understand what their inventory is. So, what equipment do you have? Where is it being manufactured? I think a lot of effort on third-party management and fourth-party management needs to occur. But we really, really need organizations to understand their third-party risk and their third-party involvement, because we really need to do some research. If you're adopting a new piece of equipment or you're buying a new piece of machinery, I really need you to understand where that was manufactured and what possibly could be a risk platform later on if we get into a war scenario or there's a threat actor somewhere that's looking for a specific piece of equipment. I generally don't talk about this a lot, but there's a tool on the internet called Shodan that is very commonly used by good and bad guys to find exposed equipment. So when something like that happens and somebody goes, hey, I want to look for all the Israeli-made equipment, they could go to something like a Shodan and get access to that at their fingertips. So that's also a whole other show on the good and bad uses of tools, right? So the whole piece of nation state actors and hacktivists, a lot of them are going to be specific targeted attacks. So maybe you're a Fortune 50 company, or maybe you're a company that makes hamburger for every restaurant in the world. There's a targeted attack there, right? That somebody's going to want to get to you in order to disrupt the supply chain. So paying attention to what is going on in other countries for sure is something that that people really need to be attentive to.
It is crazy how many different topics we brought up, and it always circles back to, in one way, shape, or form, to that asset management and just taking inventory of what you've got and understanding what you have out there that is potentially vulnerable.
Well, we talked just briefly about compliance pieces. Well, if you're familiar with the CIS controls, the Center for Internet Security, they developed something called the top 18 controls. And if you were just starting in cyber, or you're an organization, you're like, really, I just don't really know where to start. If you started with the CIS controls, they're listed in importance of the most important to the least. And you would think that control number one, if I was to just randomly ask people, what do you think the first control is? Well, first control is I should have a firewall. No, the first and second control are know your hardware and know your software. The top two. The top two are inventory. Because if you don't know what you have, then you really have less of a chance of mounting a response or protecting yourself.
Thanks, Shawn. And for more information on the work he and his colleagues are up to, you can check him out at securecyberdefense.com. Also like to thank you for joining us today, and to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Shawn Waldman, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.